Hello, my name's Alistair Whyte. I've been making pots for over 40 years now and had extensive training in my youth in Japan. And what I'd like to do here is actually show you my studio and introduce some of my work to you. Right, as we enter my studio, I have a display and there's quite a few pieces here to look at. What I make is a variety of porcelain and stoneware and even some raku. Oh, this one's a wood-fired chun glazed piece made for ikebana flower arrangement, and it's got a beautiful purple blush from the copper on the side. Here's another wood-fired piece. This is a chino glaze with a bit of iron decoration on it. Just poured and allowing the kiln to bring out the character. Here's one that's actually based on an African hoodoo drum. It resonates. It's got a chino glaze on it. It's been rim fired. Right, I'm heading out the back of my studio and collecting some recycled clay. I usually recycle all my clay, and what I'm doing here is I'm actually mixing some of the recycled clay, and you can get to see the colours of the recycled clay. I'm wire cutting it so that it's mixed together a bit like a large sandwich, and then I cut it and do some wire cutting and wedging. This is the preliminary sort of technique before actual hand wedging. Here you see me actually wire cutting and mixing the clay, and you can see the layers of clay as it gets mixed. It's a little bit like what they do in Japan with the samurai swords. They beat the metal out and they fold it into itself. So every time I cut it and hit it down against the clay, I've doubled the number of layers, and it's a very efficient way of mixing the clay. Now I'm beginning the wedging process. This is an old Japanese way of wedging. It's called kikumomi, or chrysanthemum wedging, and the idea is to knead the clay, get the particles aligning well, make the clay actually blend very well, and you'll see that I'm probably wedging up to 50 or 80 times in one direction. Then I cut it through to see how well it's blended. Usually you have to wedge it about 80 to 100 times one direction, turn it over, and then wedge it the same amount in the other direction to get a good blend. But this really homogenizes the clay and gets the clay particles working. Yes, when I cut it open you see that it's not completely homogenized, and I've turned it over and I'm actually wedging it the other direction. And with this technique of wedging you end up with a lump of clay that is just right for putting on the wheel head. It takes a lot of practice to learn this technique, but it's a very good technique for mixing clay and getting the air out. Right, now here I have the clay on the wheel head, and I'm putting out my tools. I make tools for all the different shapes that I make. It's part of the design process, and it enables me to actually repeat shapes. Sometimes years down the track people come back and say, look, we'd like another piece of that shape, and I can find my tools. And I've just placed the bamboo measure called a tombo to one side. That'll shows me the depth and the width of what I'm actually throwing. Now I'm going through the process of actually centering the clay and fixing it down firmly to the wheel head. This is a very important process to get the clay particles actually aligned and working together, and enables you to actually produce a good piece without actually aligning the clay well. You're going to have difficulty later on. Centering is a very important part of the process. This particular technique is called throwing off the hump. It's where you actually throw a series of pieces from the top of a larger lump of clay which you've centered on the wheel head. It means that you don't have to measure out balls of clay. It's got a few advantages. It also means that I can keep my back straight. It's far better posture when you're throwing. The tools are used on the inside of the shape as it's thrown, and this enables you to throw very accurately, and the measures give me the same size each time, and you can throw all day and produce a lot of pieces in this particular technique. And I'm adding slip to the tools again to allow the lubrication on the tools so that the clay doesn't stick to them, and you're very carefully holding the tools steady on the inside. It's a profile of the shape of the inside of the bowl, and most of the throwing is done lifting the clay up on the outside. Then I carefully measure to see how close I am, and I introduce the final tool which cleans the inside and gives it its final profile. These tools all have their own technical names. The first one is called a dango, and then the last one is the header, and they're made out of different materials. One is a softwood and usually a pine. The final finishing tool is usually out of a hardwood and a very fine fruitwood, and it holds its edge beautifully, and it's polished off to a very smooth finish. The final process is actually using a bit of deerskin or chamois to clean and finish off the rim of the bowl. Now these bowls are actually traditional old Chinese tea bowl shapes, temaku tea bowl shapes. It's called a temaku jawan, and they use tea ceremony a lot in Japan, but this particular shape comes through to Japan from China, and it's a very old shape, but still very much revered and used by tea masters. So with one lump of clay I can actually produce quite a few bowls on my board, and it's a much more efficient way of throwing than weighing out balls of clay and throwing off the wheelhead. What I'm doing at the moment is just tidying up some bowls that I've turned. They're a little bit thick at the moment. I turned them briefly the other day, but they just need refining. So I'm just taking a little tiny bit off, and I'm refining the surface and getting them a little bit thinner. These are beautiful little rice bowls. And the tools that I'm using are tungsten carbide. They don't lose their edge in a hurry. If I need to get it back into true, for example, if it's out, like this, I just tap it. There's a bit of a trick to that. My students find it very hard. And I listen by tapping to see how thick the base is, and I carefully thin the wall down a little bit and refine the shape. One thing you need to be careful with in a pottery studio is the dust. So too much dust is not good for the lungs. And I'm just cleaning the surface with a little bit of shim metal. And it gives it a lovely smooth finish. And the beauty of taking it on and off a chuck like this is that I can check the wool thickness very quickly, and if I need to refine something, it's on again very quickly. And I can just refine that edge. That's better. That's much better. Nice even walls. There we go. There's a front kick wheel, and it's a very easy wheel to use, this one. You can rest your arms here, keep your back straight while you're throwing, and it's very simple, easy tool to use. You just need to heat your wheat mix in the morning. As you can see, I make a whole variety of different things. I would get bored just making one particular style. I do very much enjoy painting and decorating, but by the same token I like the simple plain glazes as well, the chuns and the chinos.